Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe Lamer, Daber el Aaron ve'el Bonav Lamer, Kois tevarchu es bnei Yisrael amer lahem, Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Yo'er Adonai panav eilecha v'chunecha. Yisa Adonai panav eilecha v'yasem lecha shalom. Zamu et shmi al bnei Yisrael v'ani avarachem.
Hello, everyone. After our last podcast regarding why is it that there's such a strong custom today outside of Israel not to duchen in Ashkenazic shuls except for on Yom Tov, someone wrote in and said, what do you want? Today duchening is all the Rabbanan, it's all rabbinic, and therefore the same rabbis that said to duchen, other rabbis that said, don't do it except for 13 times a year. He wasn't totally off, but he wasn't totally right, and I'd like to explain. As I said last time, Parshat Naso instructs the Kohanim, Kol tevarchu et bnei Yisrael amor lahem, bless the Jewish people, tells us the famous bracha, Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, etc. And it seems to be a positive commandment. However, in the Torah we actually have a description of Birkas Kohanim. The first duchening in the history of the Jewish people was on the 8th day of the dedication of the tabernacle. And there it says, Vayisa Aaron et yadav el ha'am vayivarchem. Aaron put out his fingers to the Jewish people and blessed them. That's Birkas Kohanim. Vayered, and then he came down, me'asot ha'chatat va'olav ha'shlamim, bringing korbanot. Based on that link in the pasuk, the Gemara in Sota Taflamet Chet Amud Bet says, Kol kohen she'eno ole ba'avodah, shuv eino ole. A kohen must start making his way from the back of the shul to the front of the shul in the bracha of avodah, because of this link in the pasuk, and that's the way the Shulchan Aruch paskins. Kishematchil shliach tzibur retzei, the bracha of retzei, in which we ask God to bring back the sacrificial work, known in the Gemara as avodah. Kol kohen shebabet hakneset ne'erkam im kamo la'alot ha'duchan, va'af im lo higia sham ad sheyisayem shliach tzibur retzei shaper dami, aval im lo kar raglav retzei shuv lo ya'aleh. So every kohen knows that when the chazan says retzei, up until he says Hamachazir Shechinato leTzion, he has to start making his way from the back of the shul to the front of the shul. Based on this link, Rabbi Pomeranchik, one of the great Gedolim, comes along and says in his famous book, Emek Bracha, Ikar din nisiyat kapayim eino ela b'sha'at avodah. Indeed, we see a very strong link between sacrificial work, korbanot, and duchening. Because of this Gemara and this halacha. From this perspective, you understand why, way back when, duchening took place, b'sha'at hakravat tamid, kiditnan b'mesechet tamid perekei. Indeed, when they brought the morning sacrifice, that's when they duchened. From this perspective, today we don't have korbanot, so maybe the duchening is lacking. Maybe it's no longer the real McCoy, because we do have kohanim, they can duchen, but there's no korbanot. That is the position of Rav Yaakov Emden. In his Perush Moreh Ktsi on the Shulchan Aruch, he says, matter-of-factly, Nesiyat kapayim degvulin, shekol ikari no ela medivrei sofrim beli safek ba'olam. Duchening outside of the Beis HaMikdash is absolutely rabbinic, no doubt. And indeed, if you put what I just said together, maybe it makes sense. Because, as we said, the Kohanim duchen in the middle of Chazarat Hashatz. Chazarat Hashatz is rabbinic. Definitely according to the Ramban, who says all daily davening, except for times of great anguish for the Jewish people, is rabbinic. And therefore, maybe Birkas Kohanim is rabbinic. However, this seems to be a minority view. The majority view is that today, Birkas Kohanim is 100% biblical. The Shulchan Aruch paskins that a Kohen who doesn't have any sort of limitation to duchen, he has all his limbs, he could stand up, etc. If he doesn't go up to duchen, he has not fulfilled not one, not two, but 3 mitzvot aseh. And on the spot, the Mishnah Berurah in Sharat Ziyun says, Da, the Nisiyat Kapayim B'chutz La'aretz, Hugam Ken Midoraita, that even outside of Israel, twice removed, not Beis HaMikdash, not in Israel, is biblical. And everyone absolutely copied this. Not like Rav Yaakov Emden, Sheshagabeze, who made a huge mistake. He made a mistake and said it's only rabbinic. And he quotes a whole bunch of sources that says it's 100% biblical. And that's exactly what Rav Pomeranchik and Emek HaBracha says as well. Ubenisiat kapayim begvulin deleka avodat hakorban hatfilah hi bimkom avoda v'zeh midoraita. Today we don't have a Beis HaMikdash. Davening is in place of the korbanot, so therefore duchening remains biblical. And there's a few sources that I mentioned the Mishnah Berurah quotes, and I'll just quote two of them. The Sifri, the Midrash Halacha on Parshat Re'eh says Lasumit Shemo Sham, bringing God's name there. Mashmiya amur lahalan bebirkat kohanim, av shmo amur kan bebirkat kohanim. Ein li yada b'migdash begvulin minayin, tamut lamar b'chol makom asher askiret shmi. In other words, according to the Medrash, any place that the Kohanim mention God's holy name, they are fulfilling the mitzvah of Birkas Kohanim, lock, stock, and barrel. The Tosfos in Masechet Sota, on that Gemara, quotes a Yerushalmi that says, Kol Kohen sha'amad be'veit ha'kneset, he stands in shul, not in the Beis HaMikdash. Ve'ino noseh kapav, over ba'aseh. If he doesn't duchen, he has not fulfilled a positive commandment. And we can understand this in one of two ways. Either like the Rambam, who says that there's a positive commandment to daven once a day, every day. How much you daven, what brachos you say, that's already rabbinic. But the actual once a day, every day, say Shachris, is biblical. And in that biblical time is when the Kohanim duchen. In the Emek Bracha, Rav Pomeranchik actually brings a different point of view to explain it, that he heard from Rav Yosef Zev Soloveitchik, the son of Reb Chaim, uncle of the Rav Soloveitchik that we know very well. And he said that even if you say that davening itself is the Rabbanon, still, when you daven, even if the obligation to go to Shachris is rabbinic, when you daven, you are fulfilling a biblical obligation of standing before God and pouring your heart out. And indeed, if you daven, even though the obligation to daven might be rabbinic, once you daven, you're fulfilling a biblical obligation. Like many times, going to pay a shiva call is rabbinic, but once you're there, you're fulfilling the mitzvah of v'ha'afta l'reacha kamocha, love your fellow Jew like you love yourself, and many other examples like this. In my humble opinion, there's no doubt that outside of Rav Yaakov Emden, everyone agrees that today, when you duchen, it is a biblical commandment. Which, of course, if that is true, we have to continue to ask that question as to why is it that for 352 days a year, in most places in the world, they don't fulfill a biblical obligation. But if and when they do, be it every day in Israel, every day in Sephardic shuls around the world, and 13 times a year outside of Israel, it is a biblical obligation. The closest we get to what used to be, put it in that bracha of Ritzei, because that's when the Kohanim start making their way towards the front of the shul. And in this manner, we are trying to replicate in our Migdashei Me'ata, small temples, what used to be done in the major temple.